Here we are, my longest video ever on my favorite player ever, the captain, David Wright. The guy who helped me fall in love with the game of baseball and, by proxy, helped me to begin my career in baseball media. This video means a lot to me and I hope you enjoy it. And I want you to enjoy it without any interruption, so let's get today's sponsor out of the way before we start up. And today's sponsor is SeatGeek. Baseball season is coming to a close and we are going to talk about October baseball in this video, so if you want to capitalize on some great prices and get yourself some tickets to some games, you gotta use SeatGeek. If you don't know what SeatGeek is, they're a ticketing app that makes buying tickets very, very simple. You can get the app on your phone and it's by far and away the easiest way to buy tickets to any event that you're looking to go to. It's not just limited to baseball. You can check out any sport or any concert that you're looking to go to. SeatGeek takes tickets from all over the web and puts them in one place to make buying as simple as possible. And they want to make sure you're getting a good deal, so make sure you look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. I'm pretty sure you can figure that out from here. And you can use my code JOLLY for $20 off your first order at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first order at SeatGeek. Download their app today and use my code today to get yourself some cheap tickets. Thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. And without further ado, here's the story of tragedy and triumph, the story of the captain, David Wright. One of David Wright's first baseball memories, as detailed in his memoir co-written by Anthony DiComo, was hitting 2 home runs in the Little League All-Star Game in Norfolk, Virginia at just 10 years old. For those wondering, I'm going to reference this memoir a lot, so you should definitely get yourself a copy if you're interested in learning more. Wright was still regarded as the chubby kid at shortstop, as he often tells in this book, but it wouldn't be very long before his path to stardom began to take shape. If you're a baseball fan, you probably recognize the location of Norfolk, as it's been the AAA site for the Orioles for years. But back in the early 2000s, it belonged to the Mets, and they'd hire off-duty Norfolk police officers looking for extra wages as security. David Wright's dad happened to be one of those cops, and thus Wright's affinity with the Mets was born. Wright grew up watching guys like Ray Ordonez, Jay Payton, Todd Hundley, Jason Isringhausen, and others work their way through the highest level of the minor leagues, and saw them get the call to play for the grandest stage in baseball. He was fully a Mets fan at a young age, through and through, despite being a Virginia kid. Wright's area of Virginia was also saturated with a heap of young talent. Through his childhood and adolescence, Wright played alongside numerous future big league talents like BJ Upton and his younger brother Justin, future division rival Ryan Zimmerman, and another player he'd call a role model that played for his rival high school. While Wright was becoming the first freshman ever to make varsity at Hickory High, Michael Kadire was the stud senior at rival Great Bridge High, who was well on his way to becoming a first-round pick. Wright would follow in Kadire's footsteps for years. First, Wright had to establish himself, and he did a good job, batting over .500 for a 3-year stretch as the starting shortstop for his high school team. Soon enough, big names came to see Wright play daily, names like Mets scouting director Pat LaRocque and Cubs general manager Jim Hendry. These would become the main 2 teams in play bidding for Wright's future services. Wright and his family had a plan for the upcoming draft. If Wright was taken past the 3rd round, he'd attend Georgia Tech. If taken before, he was on his way to the bigs out of high school, just like Kadire. Wright remarks that the Cubs wanted him badly, but only had the 2nd overall pick in the 1st round and decided to use it on future All-Star pitcher Mark Prior. Not a bad pick by any means, but when the Mets used their number 18 pick on Aaron Heilman, they had a supplemental 1st-round pick backing that up thanks to their trade of Mike Hampton to Colorado. Sure enough, the number 38 pick in that year's draft for the Mets was David Wright, and he was on his way. Life in the minor leagues began boring for David Wright. He'd wake up, he'd go to the park early for batting practice, he'd play, he'd come home late, go to sleep, sleep in, and do it all over again. Unsurprisingly, David Wright absolutely loved it. It didn't take long for Wright to earn a promotion to St. Lucie, and when he initially struggled to adjust to the hot, muggy Florida environment, his call-up led to his first important meeting. Waiting for him at Single A was hitting coach Howard Johnson, one of Wright's childhood idols. Hojo was a Mets legend in his own right, with 2 All-Star appearances and 3 30-home run, 30 stolen base seasons for New York. Hojo instilled the importance of not overswinging, analyzing Wright's splits properly, and helped improve Wright's stolen base prowess, a far cry from his days of being regarded as the quote-unquote chubby kid. But the most significant promotion of all was Wright's leveling up to AAA Norfolk, essentially where his whole story began. For him, he said that, quote, coming full circle back to Norfolk legitimately felt like getting called up to the big leagues. Being on the other side of it all, signing autographs and selling out crowds for the hometown faithful, working to get the call to the big leagues must have been so surreal for Wright. Of course, Wright succeeded again, hitting near .300 with 8 home runs in 31 games. He earned a trip to the Futures game, playing alongside his childhood travel baseball friend BJ Upton. He got to shadow future Hall of Fame third baseman Scott Rowland, and before before long, his time in his home state of Virginia was finished. David Wright was getting called up to the major leagues in 2004. The Mets felt they had something special with Wright, which they obviously did, but they showed it early on. Upon reaching the big leagues, the Mets gifted him number 5, as equipment manager Charlie Samuels ensured that Wright donned the same number as legendary third basemen like Brooks Robinson and George Brett. No pressure, kid. Though the Mets were mostly uncompetitive in 2004, the veterans of the team did a ton to ensure Wright's assimilation to the major leagues was seamless. Cliff Floyd bought Wright his first nice suit ever, and he also made sure that he woke up early on the final game of each road set to carry down his Louis Vuitton luggage. Joe McEwing and Wright instantly became close, with the veteran buying Wright his first pair of nice sneakers. This would be a friendship that became very important to Wright. Wright felt lucky to have such experienced players on his first MLB team, saying that had he debuted on a younger team, he, quote, wouldn't have had those types of veterans there to teach him the proper way to handle himself. He said it might not have impacted his success, but it certainly would have impacted his knowledge of how to be a leader. This obviously became a huge factor later in Wright's career. He finished his rookie year with impressive offensive numbers, eventually working his way to the 3-hole of the order before the season closed. He smacked 14 home runs in under 70 games, hitting nearly 300 and playing impressive defense at the hot corner as the Mets prepped for a big offseason for their future. That offseason, general manager Omar Minaya made splash superstar signings for outfielder Carlos Beltran and ace pitcher Pedro Martinez. In his first full season in the bigs in 2005, surrounded by all-star talent, Wright began to flourish. He eclipsed 40 doubles and 100 RBI for the first time in his career, stealing double-digit bases and OPSing over 900 as a 22-year-old. Wright was also in the top 10 of the National League for average, hits, total bases, RBI, extra base hits, and runs. The 2005 Mets had put together a solid season, ending August with a 69-62 record, but proceeded to lose 13 of their next 15 games, effectively removing them from the wildcard picture. It was capped off by losing 3 in a row to the St. Louis Cardinals. Part of the turnover from 2004 and 2005 included a manager hiring in Willie Randolph, who Wright quickly bonded with. Randolph instructed Wright to remember how he was feeling in St. Louis, with the season likely coming to an end. Willie, part of many successful Yankees teams, always used defeat as fuel to improve and wanted his Mets to do the same. This all built up to 2006, the year David Wright and his team, for that matter, leapt into the National Baseball spotlight. GM Minaya stayed active, adding all-star talent in Paul Lo Duca, Carlos Delgado, and Billy Wagner to an already stacked Mets roster. It all kicked into gear with a showdown with the crosstown rival New York Yankees in May. Ever since their 5-game loss in the 2000 World Series, the Yankees and Mets had gone back and forth in the Subway Series. In 2003, the Yankees went 6-0 against the Mets. In 2004, the Mets won their first season series against the Yankees ever, 4-2. And then the following year, in 2005, they split 3-3. So anticipation was riding high in 2006, with both teams off to hot starts, and the first game at Shea Stadium lived up to the billing. The Yankees went up 4-0 in the first inning before Carlos Beltran crushed a 3-run homer in the bottom half to make it a 1-run game. The affair stayed back and forth until the 9th, where Mariano Rivera had his first meeting ever with David Wright. After a 5-pitch battle, David Wright came out on top with a walk-off double over center fielder Johnny Damon in front of his family members who had driven up from Virginia to see him play. The Mets won the first game, then the whole series, and were off and running in a magic season. David Wright had an especially torrid June that year following this walk-off, where he hit for 10 home runs, 29 RBI, and an OPS over 1,000 in a single month. His amazing first-half performance earned him his first nod to the All-Star game, one of 6 Mets to make the cut that year. That part didn't shock him in retrospect. What did was Wright's invitation to the Home Run Derby, which he reluctantly accepted at the urging of his agent. Before the Derby started, Wright was worried that he wouldn't be able to hit one out and disappoint fans everywhere. Instead, he found himself leading the pack after the first round with a mammoth total of 16 home runs, catapulting him to a final round showdown with division rival Ryan Howard, which he eventually lost. This and an All-Star Game home run the next day made David Wright's newly burning star only shine brighter. Overall, 2006 was another fantastic season for Wright as he continued to establish himself as a premier major league talent. Wright eclipsed 110 RBI and 20 stolen bases for the first time, once again smacking over 40 doubles and over 25 home runs with the exact same OPS from the year prior. His production was both elite and consistent, and in August, he and Jose Reyes both signed multi-year extensions to become the Mets' left side infield of the future. The Mets clinched the NL East with a 4-0 win over the Marlins in mid-September, and David Wright was on his way to his first playoff run ever. In the first game of the NLDS against the Dodgers, David Wright smacked a 2-run double and hit safely in all 3 games of the Mets' first-round sweep. Later on, he'd go 0-for-9 through the first 3 games of the NLCS before homering in Game 4 to snap his skid and hit safely in each of the final 4 games. The Mets would end up losing the National League Championship Series to the Cardinals Cardinals in heartbreaking fashion, dropping Game 7 on the final out after some early heroics, including an RBI single from David Wright in the first. Listen, I don't think we need a retelling of this story. The wound is still fresh for most Mets fans, so let's just keep going. The Mets, due in part to some pitching staff injuries, were ill-equipped to reach their potential that year, though everyone, including David Wright, thought this was just the beginning of the Mets' contention window. Wright admits in his memoir that he regrets not soaking in that playoff run more, saying he wishes he, quote, could have bottled those feelings, bottled those emotions. He just kind of assumed he'd experience them every October. As most Mets fans know, this was very much not the case. 2007 holds a lot of bad memories, but it's also easily the best season of David Wright's career. Wright set the record for Mets hitting streaks to that date with a 26-game run dating back to 2006. He achieved the 5th 30-30 season in Mets history, the first since his former hitting coach Hojo did so in 1991. This was a big deal to the youngster, once referred to as the Pudgy Kid. He's only the 3rd player to reach this milestone before his 25th birthday. He won his first Gold Glove and Silver Slugger. He set career highs in plate appearances, doubles, stolen bases, walks, batting average, on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS in what is an MVP caliber season. Despite all these accolades, the NL was stacked that year, and Wright only finished in 4th place for MVP voting. But I'm sure that award wasn't on his mind. What was instead was the September collapse. After leading the NL East for most of the year, the Mets lost their division lead on the final day of the season despite holding a 7-game lead with 17 games left to play. Again, let's dance around the details. Most Mets players, including Wright, weren't able to hit well, and the pitching just fell apart. This video is about Wright's success, not the cursed Mets teams that he played for. However, Wright did say that 2007 was the toughest pill to swallow from his Mets career. 2006 was close, but he felt like that team played to their potential, where 2007 the team just completely fell apart and forgot how to win. Wright dealt with plenty of adversity over these years, even from people he considered friends. Old friend John Franco called out Wright's clubhouse leadership. Chipper Jones said he was undeserving of his 2007 Gold Glove win. He watched his manager and close friend Willie Randolph get fired overnight on a road trip in 2008, and though it was on a smaller scale than the season prior, the Mets watched another playoff berth slip through their fingers in 2008. Despite his success, Wright had to shield many bullets along the way. All the while, he continued to perform. He hit his 100th career home run on April 13th of 2008, kicking off another fantastic season that included another Gold Glove, another Silver Slugger, career high tying totals in doubles and walks, and a new career high with 124 RBIs. Wright doesn't view the 2008 season as much of a collapse compared to the year prior, saying that the Mets team, quote, never really gelled as a team that season. Even with Wright playing at MVP caliber levels again, the Mets were unable to reach October baseball, and this ushered in the end of Shea Stadium. In David Wright's peak, the 4-year stretch from 2005 to 2008, he was one of just 4 players in MLB with over 100 home runs and over 80 stolen bases, with his teammate Carlos Beltran joining that list as well. He was one of the best power speed threats of his generation, and the accolades don't stop there. He was one of just 11 players with over 100 home runs and a cumulative OPS plus over 140. He was one of just 9 players to hit over 300 alongside that 100 homer criteria. He was one of just 6 players with 24 wins above replacement over this 4-year time frame. Simply put, he was one of the best players in baseball, full stop. Wright got a nice break from the back-to-back season collapses when one of the biggest highlights of his career came along that offseason. He was finally invited to play for Team USA in the World Baseball Classic. After years waiting in the wings behind Chipper Jones and Alex Rodriguez, Wright finally got his shot to represent his country, though it came with the caveat of playing alongside Jimmy Rollins, a longtime trash talker of the Mets and the man who might have just stolen away the 2007 MVP from David Wright. Wright was actually nervous about this at first, but later remarked that Rollins turned out to be a terrific teammate, and they're still friends to this day. Later on in the tournament, Wright would punch the walk-off hit against Puerto Rico, sending the US to the semifinals against all odds. They'd lose to Japan there against the stars of tomorrow, including a young Masahiro Tanaka and an even younger Yu Darvish. Back in America, big things were happening in Queens, specifically the ushering in of the Mets' new stadium, Citi Field. Once fans got over the excitement of the new home, the glaring issues of the new park became clear quickly. Citi Field held egregiously cruel, cavernous dimensions that sapped Wright and everyone on the Mets roster of their power numbers. Despite playing in 144 games, Wright hit a career-low 10 home runs that season, 4 less than his rookie year total that he put together in just 69 games. His first was the most important though, as it was the first home run by a Mets player in Citi Field's history, a game-tying 3-run shot against the Padres. In 2009, Wright still hit over 300 and stole 27 bases, but his lack of power numbers bothered him greatly, as he lost 6 additional home runs due to the cruel dimensions of Citi Field. Meanwhile, he watched as the Mets core around him slowly whittled away during the course of the season due to injuries. Jose Reyes and Carlos Delgado played under 40 games each, and Carlos Beltran played just half the season. The Mets finished 2009 dead last in home runs with 95 as a team, the only team under 100 that year. Though he never considered himself as a pure power hitter, he was among the elite of power hitters in MLB through the prior 4 seasons, and thus Wright spent the offseason bulking more than ever before, focusing solely on improving his strength for 2010. In late April of next season, Wright collected his 1,000th career hit, jumpstarting a bounce-back season. He was able to add more power back to his swing, hitting 29 home runs the following year and silencing the critics. But it came at a price, with Wright striking out far more than he was accustomed to, with a new career high at 161 punch-outs, shattering the highest total of his peak when he struck out 118 times in 2008. Wright's Mets played 500 ball to the end of August, lingering in the wildcard race before fizzling out in September again. Wright would make his 5th consecutive All-Star team, and he was named the June 2010 National League Player of the Month after he hit .404 with 11 doubles, 6 homers, and 29 RBIs in that month alone. On the year, he maintained a 131 OPS plus and fell just a smidge under 20 stolen bases. The early 2010s Mets teams are something of a wasteland, and though Wright remained productive through most of this stretch, it remains largely insignificant to most Mets fans. What's probably remembered most about Wright's tenure at this time was the beginning of his injury troubles, which began on August 15th of that year when he was hit in the head by a Matt Cain fastball. David Wright was concussed and admitted to becoming gun-shy at the plate for the rest of the year. The one injury that any David Wright fan can recall happened in April of 2012 in a sprint to third base. David Wright wiped out completely hustling to get Carlos Lee out on the base paths, and he was able to, but in the process, he slammed his shoulder and head into the dirt, straining his neck and causing immediate back discomfort. David, who had just missed time with injury for the first time in his professional career a season prior, chose to keep his injuries a secret this time, figuring he could sleep on it, but he couldn't. He didn't feel fine the next day or the day after that, yet played through this constant pain for an entire month before Mets trainers finally suspected something was wrong due to his poor numbers and the fact that he wasn't spending any additional time in the batting cages like he had always done. Wright would miss the following 2 months rehabbing his back. Upon his return in mid-July, you could tell he was dying to get back on the field by the way he hit, going 20 for 44 with 5 extra base hits and 12 RBI in his first 2 weeks back. 2011 would be David Wright's fewest games played of any full season in his career to that point, however, with just 102 games, 14 home runs, and a 115 OPS plus. 4 games into the following season in 2012, David Wright would break his pinky attempting a stolen base. Desperate to avoid missing time yet again, Wright pleaded with new manager Terry Collins and even snuck out of the dugout to take additional swings that the training staff had urged him not to do. He ended up playing that day with a limp pinky and would end up homering off Vance Worley of the Phillies anyway. The next few years of Mets baseball blended together, with Wright accumulating most of the highlights along the way. He set the all-time record for both hits and RBIs by a Mets player separately. He returned to the All-Star game in 2012 and 2013 after breaking his streak in 2011. At the end of 2012, he signed a mammoth extension to remain with the Mets and was named the 4th captain in club history by his teammates and coaches. Later on in 2013, Matt Vasgersian birthed the nickname Captain America for David Wright after a monster performance in the World Baseball Classic for Team USA. David Wright would return to the Home Run Derby in 2013 as a captain, and he assembled a team featuring his old friend Michael Kadire and sort of acted as the host for that year's All-Star Week festivities. Wright was building himself something of a Hall of Fame caliber career, yet still was hungry to return to the playoffs to finish the business he began nearly a decade ago at this point. He had missed decent time with injuries, but there was no reason to suspect that David Wright's peak was ending anytime soon. Then, 2015. A significant year for many Mets fans. The Mets got off to a red-hot start this year, reeling off 11 straight wins against division rivals to build a commanding early lead in the NL East. But Wright re-aggravated his 2013 hamstring strain with another stolen base attempt, forcing another injured list stint. However, this hamstring was not going to be the issue that plagued Wright for the rest of the season and the rest of his career. That come from an old friend that David Wright thought he was rid of. The first thing doctors told David Wright upon his diagnosis was, "Don't Google it." Of course, that was the first thing he did, typing the words spinal stenosis into his search bar for the first time, revealing the potential horrors it entailed for his career. Wright spent the next few months in Los Angeles rehabbing his unbearable back pain daily with no clear timetable for his return. This new uncharted territory is what Wright regards as the most difficult point of his career, watching from a couch as the Mets NL East lead dwindled from May to June. Wright was finally cleared to resume baseball activities on July 24th as he inched towards a long-awaited return. Wright said that he had been, quote, away 3 months, but that it felt more like like 3 years. Wright returned to the clubhouse at a pivotal time as well. The Mets had just survived an early July West Coast gauntlet against the Giants and Dodgers, called up top prospect Michael Conforto, and made trades for veteran presences like Kelly Johnson and Juan Uribe. Their once anemic offense had been remedied, but many thought one more move would put them over the top. 5 days after he resumed baseball activities and rejoined the club, Wright was in the clubhouse the night the Mets hosted the Padres at Citi Field. In the 8th inning of an ensuing loss, news broke on social media that the Mets had flipped Wilmer Flores in a trade with the Brewers to acquire Carlos Gomez. Flores, still on the field playing shortstop, was visibly emotional, crying in what was presumed to be his final game with the club he had been a part of since he was 16 years old. Terry Collins requested that Wright go into the clubhouse and figure out what was going on, which is how he initially found out about the would-be trade. And David Wright was the one who followed Flores into the clubhouse after the inning ended to console him, taking a seat beside the red-eyed infielder. Wright recalls his reaction as, quote, refreshing, knowing very few guys would respond in such a genuine fashion. But as we all know by now, that trade never happened, and Wilmer became a legend for it, and his bond with David Wright grew stronger. And I'm pretty sure Mets fans were happy with the alternative option, acquiring Yoenis Cespedes from the Tigers instead. Soon after, Wright began his rehab assignment, but in his mind, it didn't go well. Despite hitting .321 with 5 walks in 8 games, Wright considered himself, quote, flat-out garbage, making 3 errors and only hitting singles in his stint. Still, in his first game back in Philadelphia a couple weeks later, Collins slotted him in the 4-hole, much to Wright's surprise. He responded in kind, slamming an Adam Morgan fastball into the stratosphere for a monster solo home run in his first at-bat back. Wright made a beeline to the clubhouse to embrace John Zajac, the Mets' physical therapist who endured the rehab journey alongside Wright during that difficult season. Wright ended 2015 with an impressive offensive stat line despite missing the majority of the season. Wright became the longest tenured active player to have played his entire career with one team when Chase Utley was flipped from the Phillies to the Dodgers. Later on in September, when Wright homered off Burke Badenhop in the Mets' NL East clinching game against the Reds, the score wasn't close, but his teammates on the bench erupted. In Wright's words, quote, the reception he received after that relatively meaningless home run is something he'll remember forever. They were acknowledging what he had done to make it back onto the field. Overall, in 2015, Wright had 174 plate appearances and still managed a 126 OPS plus and 12 extra base hits despite his injuries. But Wright wasn't 100%, and most of his teammates knew this. His bat speed had slowed, and he had batted just .231 against fastballs of 95 plus miles per hour down the stretch as pitchers began challenging him with only heat. But this didn't deter Wright, as he punched a 2-run single off a 99 mile per hour heater from Pedro Baez in Game 1 of the NLDS, a playoff hit 9 years in the making for the captain. The Mets and Dodgers battled in every inning of their 5-game set. Chase Utley broke Ruben Tejada's leg in Game 2, the Mets erupted for 13 runs in their first home playoff victory at Citi Field in Game 3, Daniel Murphy became Babe Ruth, Clayton Kershaw blanked the Mets to force Game 5, and in the final game, the legend of Jacob deGrom was born as the Mets survived to advance to the NLCS. The time off between games and series was pivotal for Wright, who was enduring up to 5 hours of warm-ups before each game to get his back to cooperate. Still, there was no chance he was missing any playing time in what could be his final playoff run. Wright collected 4 hits, 4 walks, 4 runs scored, 2 doubles, and 2 RBI in the Mets' 4-game sweep of the Cubs in the NLCS as they advanced to the World Series for the first time in 15 years. Waiting for David Wright there was arguably the last great moment of his legendary career in his first trip to the Fall Classic. The Mets fell behind 2 games to the upstart Royals that year, returning back to New York in desperate need of a win. After falling behind 1-0 early with Noah Syndergaard on the mound, David Wright stepped into the box with the runner on against Yordano Ventura, the hardest throwing pitcher in the Royals rotation. After Wright fouled off the first pitch fastball, Ventura placed one in the exact same location, and the captain was ready. Wright unleashed a thunderous swing, catapulting the ball deep into the left field stands. Wright said it was one of the few shots of his career that he, quote, knew was gone as soon as he hit it. The crowd roared, possibly the loudest roar in Mets history. Wright's teammates went ballistic. Chills were sent up the spines of the broadcasters. Wright said that he felt like he floated from one dugout to the other. In Wright's touching words, he said he will, quote, never ever forget that home run or how he felt in that moment. It's something he will hold close to himself for the rest of his life. Later on in that game, he smacked a 2-run single to cap off a 4 RBI game and his second multi-hit game of the World Series. The Mets won 9-3, and this would become, to this date, the only World Series win in Citi Field's history thus far. It didn't end the way fans and the team wanted it to, but David Wright had finally gotten his World Series moment, and there's something really special about that. This, however, was the beginning of the storybook ending to Wright's career. He'd make it back onto the field for opening day in 2016, setting the Mets record with his 12th consecutive start in an opening game, the longest such streak in franchise history. The plan was to have Wright play 3 out of every 4 games, realistically setting him at a 120 game pace for 2016. But Wright's back wasn't going to allow this to happen. Injuries continued to pile up, the latest being a herniated disc in Wright's neck, forcing him to undergo the first surgery of his career and once again prematurely ending his season. This was a major operation too. For 10 days after the surgery, Wright had trouble swallowing, he needed his parents to help him get out of bed, he couldn't shave, if he sneezed the wrong way, he could damage his neck severely. During the surgery, doctors were forced to move a nerve in Wright's neck that aggravated once he tried to resume baseball activities in 2017. That season was the first in 13 years that the Mets broke camp without David Wright present. After a year and a half of waiting, he'd make his first rehab assignment in August of that season, but go 1 for 10 with 5 strikeouts. David Wright needed more surgeries, this time to both his shoulder and his back, forcing him out for the remainder of the season once again. It became clear to him finally that the end of his career was nearing, and he had done everything he possibly could have to remedy this situation. In 2018, Wright decided to try and make it back for one final game and end his career on his terms. His rehab again didn't go well, as he went 0 for 14 with 6 strikeouts in his first 5 games. But this didn't deter Wright, as if anything ever could. His pain didn't hinder him either. He was going to come back and play in front of the Mets faithful one last time. He somehow managed to play in back-to-back 9-inning games at the end of his rehab, the Mets' final stipulation they requested before they activated him off the injured list for the first time in 2 years. When Wright tearfully announced his final game at a press conference, Citi Field sold out tickets within hours of the news breaking. When September 28, 2018 finally came, tears were flowing for everyone. Wright's daughter tossed the first pitch, he embraced Jose Reyes one last time on the right side of the infield, he made one last play at the hot corner, and took 2 at-bats before gracefully waving goodbye to the fans he had loved for nearly 2 decades. He joined the legendary SNY booth, sat down with Howie on the radio, and gave a tear-jerking speech to fans after the conclusion of a Mets win over the Marlins. And just like that, it was all over. David Wright ended his career as the Mets' all-time leader in plate appearances, hits, runs, extra base hits, walks, RBIs, and wins above replacement. He was a 7-time All-Star, a Home Run Derby runner-up, a 2-time Gold Glover, a 2-time Silver Slugger, and a member of the 30-30 Club. He is one of, if not the, best player in Mets history, and will soon have his number hung up in the Citi Field rafters, never to be worn again by another Mets player. His story is heartbreakingly tragic, but his sheer will to prevail and fight back when odds are stacked against him is truly triumphant. He's important to so many baseball fans, including myself, standing as the absolute pinnacle of class and hardworking nature for all athletes. His peak was among the best of any player in baseball at the time, and he had one of the most signature World Series moments of the past decade. He did not allow the vicious nature of his injuries to end his career, and he bravely came back on his own terms. He's an inspiration to many, and a role model for basically every Mets fan out there. Without him, I'm not sure what I'd be doing with my career, so I'm eternally grateful to him helping me fall in love with the game of baseball. David, if you somehow ever see this, I hope I did your story some justice. And thank you to you guys for 50,000 subscribers. I hope I delivered well enough. That'll do it for this video. I'm the Jolly Olive, and I will see you next time.